Next, actor and filmmaker Rob Reiner sits down with author and former speechwriter David Frum to talk about threats to U.S. democracy posed by Russia. This was part of the recent Politicon conference held in Pasadena, California.
Those of you, and David, you're younger than I am, but those of you who are of my age, and I see a couple out there, not too many, you will remember when we were in school in the 50s, we were taught duck and cover drills. That was to get under our desks in case of a nuclear attack. And there was a lot of fear in the country. Bomb shelters were being built around the country. And I make the joke all the time that, the actual material that school desks were made of could actually stop a nuclear holocaust. Not true, but we used to joke about it. But what happened is the Cold War ended, number of administrations, ending with Ronald Reagan, who famously said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." And we had, for a short period of time, a window where we all felt kind of okay, where the world is moving in the direction we have all wanted it to move, in a democratic direction where democracy was now starting to take hold, even in the former Soviet Union. And it was very short-lived there. We saw a man named Vladimir Putin, who was a former KGB official, fill a void, essentially, take over. There was a lot of chaos and an inability to make that transition into a democracy. He moved in, took advantage of the chaos, and started an authoritarian state, and which meant limiting the freedom of speech, clamping down on dissidents, putting them in jail, even murder. And we had beat him in the Cold War. We had basically gotten to a point where the nuclear arms race had buried them economically. They were devastated. So there was a lawlessness that kind of took over, and these oligarchs started taking power, and Putin was in control of many of them, and everything had to be run through him. Now, here's what you have to understand, and this is the tricky part. And this is why it's so important that we talk about this. What they were talking about doing was taking over, that communism was going to take over our democracy. That didn't quite work out the way they wanted it to. But now there's an authoritarianism that is prevalent there, and they still desire for America to be weakened, and for this wonderful 241-year-old experiment to fail. Great societies, great civilizations traditionally last anywhere from 250 to 300 years. We see what he has done is effectively invaded our country. It doesn't feel like it right now, because it's like high blood pressure. You go along and then you drop dead before you are aware that it's happening to you. It's much more insidious, and I've said many times, if an atom bomb had dropped on one of our major cities and Russia was responsible, there's no question we'd be up in arms. We'd be, the whole country would come together. This is the first time in our history that I'm aware of that we have been attacked by a foreign hostile power, and we do not see, except for principled, and we're on opposite sides of the political spectrum, but I've had conversations with George Will, with David Krauthammer, with Max Boot, with William Kristol, some very, very smart, principled Republican thinkers who are on the same page as those of us on the other side. We're all on this together. We have not seen, as of yet, the elected officials on the Republican side come along. They will, because they all know what the truth is. The truth is we have been attacked. We have been weakened. Our system of democracy, the free press, this man sitting over here his whole network has been attacked. CNN has been attacked. New York Times, the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, they've all been attacked. And it's what Putin was able to do and co-opt the media. We have certain institutions in this country, and we're hoping that those institutions will stay strong and protect us. And maybe they will. But we are at a critical point right now as to whether or not they will. Because make no mistake about it, they've already invaded us, and they will continue to try to weaken us. They want the EU to go away, they want NATO to be destroyed, and everything is designed for Putin to give more power. And he lucked out in one way, in that he got a president, for whatever reasons, and we'll find out what they are, he is in line with.
That's a different congressional investigation.
Well, no, he's in line with it. But what the first really great sign that we've seen is that we've seen the Senate and the House pass overwhelmingly sanctions against Russia. Overwhelmingly. And that's the first time we've seen this country come together in that way. So I know the Republicans in the House and Senate feel the same way as I do. I know they do. And the president is going to be forced into having to sign it, but they've already made their statement, and they're here. The question is, will we fight back, and will we protect this thing that we love that's 241 years old? That's what's at stake, and young people don't understand that. Hopefully they will.
Thank you, Rob. And so when I got the description of who's going to be sitting on the panel, I said, these two are going to get along on the same issue? And then I saw Russia. And so if this were to be a revival of that old show called Crossfire, these would be the perfect two guests to have on.
David, you ignorant slut.
Well, David, with that, to you on this, do react to what was said, and how big a deal is this?
It's a global deal. It's not just an American story. I was in Hungary in the spring of 2016 and was marveling at the way that Russian intelligence has supported, through money, through propaganda, through these fake news stories that you've all come to know. It's a strange thing. In 2016, fake news meant the planting of false stories that were there to deceive people, and in 2017, fake news has come to mean true stories that were meant to enlighten people. But the Russians use these methods in many different places and supporting many different kinds of parties. Sometimes they have given their support to parties of the right, as happened in France with the National Front. Sometimes to parties of the left, and you see that in some of the countries of Central and Eastern Europe. Sometimes to countries with fascist backgrounds. Sometimes to parties with communist backgrounds. And I spoke to a wise person in Hungary and said, I don't get the strategy, because what they do is so promiscuous. And this wise observer said, the Russians do not need us to trust them. They need us, and here the observer meant the different countries of the NATO alliance, to distrust each other. Russia is a country with an economy about the size of Italy. The average lifespan for a Russian male is in the low 60s. It's a country with an economy that is now going into reverse. Russia's a country with an economy. Louder? How's this better? This just went off. Let me try this one.
Okay, let's do a mic check.
Okay, how's this one?
First, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Are we good on Richard? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
How's this?
Let's do David. Whoa. Let's try it with that. Now try it.
Okay.
Let's count to 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
And Rob, could you do that for me?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Are we good in the corner?
No.
Okay. All right.
Louder.
All right.
Louder.
I'm going to stand up and say this loudly and speak from the diaphragm as you would coach.
Yeah, that's working. Stagecraft.
Russia is a country with an economy about the size of Italy's.
Use the hand mic.
Okay. Still can't hear.
Okay. Russia is a country with an economy about the size of Italy's. Life expectancy for men is in the low 60s. The economy is now shrinking as oil prices decline. Russia had an opportunity at the end of the Cold War to become a normal European country. And that is what many, many people in Russia would have liked. Power was seized by Vladimir Putin in 2000, and he has moved the country, as Rob said, in an increasingly authoritarian direction, to the cost of ordinary people in Russia whom he has plundered. I think we are not here exactly speaking the language of nationalism anymore, of nation against nation. We are talking about a criminal gang that has seized power in Russia, that has plundered those people, that brutalizes those people, that involves them in wars, that commits murders, now is committing murders on the soil of Britain and the United States. And they are looking opportunistically for allies around the world, because the world order that we have been trying to build since the end of the Cold War, one built based on rules, based on commonalities, obviously countries will always differ, is a world that would be good for the most people in Russia, but very inhospitable for the criminal gang that is plundering that country. And now they have turned to the United States in an act of such extraordinary audacity. One of the things that I think about when I think about the danger we are in now is imagine the meeting with Vladimir Putin in the spring or summer of 2016, or whenever it happened, when somebody said, I have a brainwave. You know that candidate Hillary Clinton who is 10, 12 points ahead in every poll? We are going to mount an intelligence operation to defeat her and help the most implausible presidential candidate ever. And we think we're going to be able to make a difference. But you need to know, sir, this is kind of a risky operation because Hillary, I know she has friends, but I don't think even her best friends would say a forgiving temperament is one of Hillary Clinton's outstanding qualities. If this goes wrong for us, you are going to be alone in the room with the new president of the United States who is going to be very angry with you. And the fact that Vladimir Putin said, I will take that risk, is an example of someone who is not a prudent calculator of risks. He is taking wild risks. One of the questions I'm sometimes asked, and I'll stop here, but isn't China a bigger and more potent and more powerful long-term problem for the United States? It's also non-democratic. It's much richer than Russia. It's much stronger. It's going to be much more difficult to integrate into the democratic system. But the difference between Russia and China is this. The leaders of China have many, many terrible qualities, but they are very prudent calculators of risk. They do not stumble into crises. And they think in longer terms, and they also understand that while in some ways their interests conflict with ours, in other ways they overlap. It is very possible to imagine that you can work out ways to share the planet peacefully with China, and that we all hope that they will evolve in ways that are more democratic, more open, more congenial. But whether that happens or not, you can easily imagine staying out of conflict with China. But when you are confronted with people who take crazy risks for criminal ends, that's not just an attack, as you said, on American democracy. It is a threat to the peace of the world, because what other stupid mistake will they make?
You know, David, you make an incredible point in that China has a burgeoning economy. They are stronger, and they have a growing economy. And as you pointed out, Russia, basically it's energy and not much more. And it is a very weak economy. But think about this for a second. If you are, and maybe he is a risk player, he may be putting all in on something. But if you have very little, you don't have much, the one thing you have is the ability to use an incredibly inexpensive weapon to disrupt a world, to disrupt democracy. And all you have to do is, like you say, push out fake news, affect people's mindsets so they vote a certain way, and insinuate yourself into the fabric of American life to the point where we start fearing what is happening here. You're winning. Then if you take it the next step, and this we'd hopefully never have to get there, because I don't believe that the Chinese are doing, they're doing all the cyber warfare and they're spying, and so are we. But there's a difference between when you're desperate and you don't have much, and you know that that very inexpensive thing that you're doing can be weaponized in a severe way. And I've said, if you saw the bomb drop, you'd go, oh my God, look what's happened. But when you have a weapon that can shut down energy grids, can stop water supplies, can be physically weaponized to blow stuff up, like we did with Stuxnet. Everybody knows about Stuxnet and what we did in Iran. We actually blew up centrifuges. That's something that can be done. So there is a capacity in this new cyber warfare that is scary, as scary, if not scarier, than the idea of nuclear armaments, because you can see a nuclear weapon and you can track it and you can maybe shoot it down. These are much, much more difficult weapons to track. And so that's the scary part, what David just mentioned. You're working with somebody who is taking big risks because they don't have a lot. And that's the scary part.
I want to get, please go ahead, and I want to get a sense from the audience.
I want to say, in addition to the scary part, there's also a hopeful part, and a part that involves all of you. Because in this battlefield, you are the battlefield, your minds, your attention. This is a new kind of global conflict in the social media age, where every one of you carries in your pocket more broadcasting power than Walter Cronkite ever disposed of. You're the battlefield. And you know what else you are? You're also combatants. You're also, every one of you, someone who can play a role. Let me tell you a good story about the defeat of what the Russians did from France. They intervened heavily in the French presidential election in the same way. There's a candidate of the center, Emmanuel Macron. There's a candidate of the extremes, one very close to Russia. The Russians had financed the French National Front. That's a matter of public record. They were caught with a 20 million euro loan to Marine Le Pen's party. Candidate Macron was at an event. He's very proud of the fact he has a rural country background, which is a big thing in a country so dominated by Paris. And he went to an event where he was given some eels and a knife to gut the eel, which is apparently a necessary skill if you want to be president of France. You have to be an accomplished eel.
It's not eating a pizza with a knife and
fork. Not anymore.
You have to be an eel gutter. So Macron takes off his jacket, rolls up his sleeves, takes the knife and guts the eel, and does a great job, and everybody records it. Eel gutting, I haven't done it myself, but I can see from the video, it's messy work.
Yeah.
So after he's finished, he washed his hands, and then put his jacket back on, and then shook hands and campaigned. Somebody took this video and doctored it to make it seem not that he had washed his hands after gutting the eel and before shaking the hands of the voters, but after shaking the hands of the voters, as if to say, it is too disgusting for me to touch the hands of ordinary people. And this video went viral. We are only, by the way, at the beginning of the age of faking video. Many of you are in the industry, you know what is coming in video faking. It took an extraordinary effort by a lot of people in France fighting this on their social media to say, this was a lie. This was just a lie that had the appearance of truth. This was a lie. This was a created lie that had the appearance of truth. And my message to all of you is, you are all not only consumers of news, you're manufacturers, you're broadcasters. When you act in a responsible way, when you check every link before you forward it, when you take responsibility for what you curate in your Facebook feed or your social media, you are standing up for important principles of the knowability of the external world, the legibility of reality for democracy, and you can fight back. And that is what successfully happened in France. It didn't happen here this time, but it can. This is a world of asymmetry in which the Russians are so much weaker, not only the United States, but compared to all the NATOs. They have leveraged their weakness against the democratic world. But their leverage is also counter-leverageable by networks of individuals acting in socially responsible ways.
So they're leveraging their weakness and turning it into a strength. And right in front of us, and we're in 2017 right now, 2018, right around the corner, in about a month or two, so begins the election cycle, right? And for those of you out there right now, who is worried potentially that we will see a repeat, or that it may even be worse, that we'll see a tsunami? Clap if you agree with that. Because When I was speaking with the various secretaries of state that gathered earlier last month, they were worried. Now, the way they were expressing it was in different ways, depending on which state they were from. But what is it you're watching, Rob and David, as we get very close to potentially seeing this weakness, which is leveraged to be into a strength, affecting what's happening state to state to state?
Well, I think what David pointed out is, again, exactly right. If we as a country all acknowledge what has happened and start using our tools to fight back, we can defeat that. But until we realize how serious what happened has occurred, we won't be able to do that. So right now, you've got a big chunk of our country that doesn't really care about this or doesn't think it's important. And what we need to do is start educating people that it is important, and that if we do use our smartphones and our social media, we can fight it, and then we won't have to worry. But that's a short period of time that we have to educate people.
Is that the way that we'll bring in those fringes that you're alluding to here, Rob, David? Is that the way? Because it doesn't seem like the mainstream media will be the way to get those individuals that are on the edges to moderate.
No, we are going to live in a much more networked, decentralized, and distrustful world than our parents and grandparents did. That's just the background. So all of our plans have to, for the future, have to take into account realities of the physical world and the technological world in which we now live. But here's some things when you say, what am I worried about in 2017? There's evidence that the Russians attempted to manipulate voting systems in 2016. It looks like they were foiled by the chaos and slovenliness of the American voting system, that an American weakness stopped them. That they,
why, thank you, David, thank you.
Because it turns out, we don't keep good records, and they vary county by county, and it was just too big an undertaking. That is probably not something to rely on for the long term. And we have to think of election infrastructure as critical infrastructure, every much as the security of a nuclear power plant. And just as we harden nuclear power plants, it is embarrassing that the electoral system of Mexico is so much more technologically sophisticated than the electoral system of the United States. But there's a risk, which is if you improve it a little bit, you actually make it more vulnerable. That the incompetent, slovenly, chaotic system is tamper-proof because it's so slovenly. If you made it somewhat better, it would be more vulnerable only by really hardening it. What I'm also worried about, and the most difficult thing, sometimes we have elections that are not close, 2006, 2008, and afterwards there's a lot of grumbling, but no one questions what happened because it's just obvious. Sometimes we have elections that are close. And if you have a society in which people are being encouraged to be distrustful, a society that, by the way, happens to be extremely heavily armed, and with the arms not randomly distributed, but in relatively very few people owning quite a lot of arms, there is always a risk of things spiraling out of control. I was born in Canada, and I'm more pessimistic probably by outlook than native-born, native-raised Americans are. But I think the thing I have worried about the most is that Americans have this serene confidence that everything is going to be okay in the end. And I think that is the greatest single obstacle to everything being okay in the end. You need to be more worried if you want to have more positive outcomes.
Yeah. Also, the voting system, we have a very strange way of voting in this country. We don't have presidential elections. We have 50 elections. There are 50 different states, and they run them all in different. They have different districts and so on, and different voting machines and so on. There is one state, Oregon, everything is vote by mail. Now, here we are in the world of technology. I would argue that the less technology, the better off we have with paper ballots, things you can physically count that are harder to hack. And it would be, instead of having a presidential commission that's designed to try to expose voter fraud, which is, this commission is a fraud to begin with, wouldn't it be great if we could work out a way in which vote by mail, we have it in many states, you can vote ahead of time by mail. Wouldn't that be where we can have actual physical ballots and make it so that, yes, there's a last day in which you can vote, which is the Tuesday, but make it that available to people that it would take away people being dissuaded from voting. It would take away from trying to suppress vote and give you a paper trail and something a little bit more accurate to count. So I would say you go the other way with technology, not to try to improve the technology, but go back to a little bit more analog.
One thing when I speak with the experts from Russia specifically on MSNBC is they will sometimes say, be careful with your language, Richard, because sometimes we are over-categorizing the Russians. Should we be more specific? Certain Russian leaders, you were alluding to Vladimir Putin earlier, or those who might be on, if you will, the dark web, those who are working for Russian desires that are not in our good interest here in America?
Well, I always try, and I'm sure I slip many, many times, but I do try in my public commentary, even on television, to say the Russian state and not Russians.
Right.
Because you will often hear it said that Vladimir Putin is acting on for Russian national interests. And I think, well, I would think the Russian national interest would be to raise male life expectancy from 62 to 72. That would seem a vital, literally, Russian interest. I would think, making sure that there's access to health care in all the vast villages of Russia, that the economy begins growing again, that's a Russian national interest. Whatever Vladimir Putin's net worth is, whether it's 10 or 50 or, as some people say, $200 billion. I think most Russians could think of better uses for that money than buying Vladimir Putin another apartment in Paris. So, yes, I don't think we should speak of the Russians. And I tried in my opening remark to refer to this criminal gang that rules Russia, and that is more adverse to the interests of the Russian people. I mean, why is it that they want to disrupt the NATO alliance? Why is that so intolerable to them? Why are they waging war in Ukraine? Because Europe offers an example with many different varieties, and what happens works in France, doesn't work in Germany, what works in Germany won't work in Russia. Everybody will have their own pathway. But the vision of a society that is run with the consent of the governed, that seeks to maximize the welfare of the majority of people in the country, that is something that is as attractive to Russians as it is to everybody else. We don't want to return to the Cold War and to living on the precipice. We need to remember our fundamental commonality. And we also need, I think one of the things I'm hoping that we all learn from this, and as I speak as somebody on the hardline, hawkish right, that we learn the importance of military alliances, we learn the importance of intelligence agencies, we learn why Edward Snowden is not a hero, that the secrets he betrayed are secrets you need kept, every one of you, they're in your interest. But at the same time, that there are things I think that we also have to learn from the traditional liberal sense of American foreign policy, the sense of, we are building a world governed by rules. We are building alliances. That the only way America can be successful is when America thinks America first was never a relevant slogan. It's always the only way that America can be first for its people is if it works collectively with its friends and allies. That America's power comes from being at the center of a network of other democracies with broadly similar interests, values, culture.
And when you think about the evolution of our country and where we started, where only white men of property could vote, and now we have gotten, going through the women's movement and the suffragettes and the Brown versus the Board of Education and Loving versus Virginia and the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act and all of the things that have happened in this country, and we're seeing the true vision, I think, of what Founding Fathers saw, which is all men are created equal, all women created equal, everyone, whether they're gay, straight, transgender, male, female, black, white, yellow, whatever you are, whatever religion, here's a place you can go and live. And it's messy, but if we can pull it off, if we actually can make a country that allows Muslims and Jews and Christians and atheists, whomever, to play in one place, that is the greatest message that we could send to the rest of the world, because there's a thing about being one, about being all one, and that we are all human beings. And the United States has the opportunity to project that around the world and make that a beautiful image to want to embrace. But when you have somebody who is ceding our, because we've been attacked and maybe been weakened, and you see a president who is ceding our position in the world, that takes this wonderful experiment of democracy and starts to diminish it. So right now we're at a critical point here where we can either strengthen it and all come together as if we've been attacked from outside, and start coming together. But we need to understand that that's what's happening.
And I want to build on that, Rob, because that's a great point, because as we watch this on the news, what has been happening over the last couple of months, that liberal sense of a global order, and we look at NATO, we look at G20, we look at the Brussels Forum, we look at gatherings of leaders from around the world, and they're saying, well, hang on a second, maybe this idea that we have been working on, this experiment that both of you have been talking about, needs to be rejiggered. And it appears, based at least on this president's moves, that he believes that it also needs to happen, that the realignment of what NATO means, he's not necessarily against that. The realignment of the way that the global business infrastructure works is okay as well. And that nationalism, that being one idea, might be the new model.
During the campaign, there was an anonymous quote from somebody who worked for one of the Republican candidates who opposed Donald Trump. During the campaign, there was this wonderful quote from one of a consultant to one of the Republican candidates who had opposed Donald Trump. And this consultant was asked, do you think Donald Trump can become a more normal kind of figure? And he said, teaching Donald Trump to be a normal political figure is like teaching Charles Manson to dance.
He was an excellent dancer.
So,
that was the one thing he could do.
So, he learns, that you can do it, and he learns a few steps, and he executes the steps, and then he puts a fork in your eye because he's Charles Manson. So,
there you go. There's the tweet, David, from today. There it is. Yeah, that's right there.
I've used it. I've used it. When you say, does President Trump have a vision of international order?
Right.
He'll put a fork in your eye. That's his vision of international order.
Your vision.
Look, one of the things that, and I know it's very hard, media, there are certain conventions and conceits that govern the media. And one of them is you cannot say every day that the president has no plan, the president is a maniac, the president is unfit for office. I mean, you have to, that there's certain convention, and it's boring, and you say the same thing, and they say, yes, okay, now we need to get past that. In this new White House chief of staff, will there be a pivot to a more normal White House? And you say, that is a category, the whole question. The one that I objected to the other day is somebody asked, what will happen to this team? They don't seem very competent if there's a real international crisis. To which I say, this team is the real international crisis.
Yes. No, that's it. We're in it. We're in it right now. We're in it.
The election of Donald Trump is the biggest international crisis since the end of the Cold War, including 9/11, because this is one that calls into question the ability of the United States to undergird the world order. And just as American liberals are having discovery, we need the CIA, we need the NSA, we needed NATO, so German liberals are discovering we needed the Americans. I mean, we like to rag on them, but we need it. Germany can't run the world system.
Well, you got liberals now who like Jeff Sessions all of a sudden. Jerry, you got to keep Jeff Sessions there.
And I think your quote might be inconceivable, is what you might be saying.
Well, we're trying to, at this point, we want anything that can hold us together so that we're not, having a major constitutional crisis.
If I can, because it's the news of the day and you can reflect on it very quickly, then we can move on to something else. But the sanctions. The sanctions are now moving forward. The question to the two of you, is it enough? Is it signaling the right thing to Russia?
It signals the right thing, and especially this massive vote in the Senate signals the right thing. But
Veto-proof.
But it's not enough. There are a series of other things that have to happen, both domestically and internationally. The Russians, as many intelligence people say, will be back. And next time, they may well turn on Donald Trump. That they may well want that, because in the end, although they like having a friendly local agent,
Useful idiot.
but he's so unreliable.
Yeah, he's not that useful.
He may not be that useful.
Yeah. Just an idiot, just plain idiot. Stop at that. I'm sorry.
They're loosening up now.
If the next election is close, if they can get considerable numbers of Americans, especially well-armed Americans, to dispute the validity of the result, that also could be a win. So we need to harden the electoral system. But above all things, harden at home, we need to build a new American political consensus. Here's the most important thing that happened in France that didn't happen here. That Emmanuel Macron, who was from a party of the left, created his own party. The French have a much more complicated voting system. Exactly. And they vote, and they have the advantage, or what proved to be an advantage, they vote for the president separately from the parliament. So it was possible for Macron to do the equivalent of calling people into a room and saying to the traditional parties of the right, what do you need not to back Le Pen? What do you need to sit this one out? Some of them backed him, but at most, what do you need? I know many of you don't like me. What do you need to just sit this election out? And evidently, I don't know this, but you can see it happen. Some kind of deal was struck where they said, here are 3 things we need you to do. Here are 3 things we need you not to do. If we have an undertaking that these things will be done and not done, we can absent ourselves from this election because we'd rather have you, as little as we like you, than we want to have what this will mean for France if the National Front wins. And they struck that deal. And although the National Front did disturbingly well, the fact is France now has a strong government backed by a strong parliament and a strong political consensus. We need to make that possible here. And what I would say, I think this is a predominantly liberal room attracted by the star power of Mr. Reiner. It might be. There is no reason in the world that the techniques and tactics that were used to help Donald Trump and hurt Hillary Clinton could not have helped a populist candidate of the left against a Scott Walker.
Yeah. There's another very hopeful thing that I saw happening in this past week, and it's for a couple of reasons. We saw the health care bill be defeated, but it's not that it was defeated. It was the way in which it got defeated when you had, I'm not taking anything away from Lisa Murkowski or Susan Collins, who they stuck to their ground. But John McCain did something I think very, very important. He came in and he voted for the motion to proceed. And then he came in and he gave a speech, a great speech about returning to normal order.
Yeah.
And what that meant was that if we are going to move ahead, and I've said this to David before, I've said it to many of my Republican friends, the only way a democracy works is if you have a very strong Republican Party, principled and strong Republican Party, and a very strong principled Democratic Party. It doesn't work any other way. And for him to come in there and say that, and then it gets defeated, there is a little glimmer of hope where you might see some people starting to come together because of the president that's in the White House. Because he has no core beliefs, he has no ideology, he doesn't care about what passes or doesn't. So the Congress can then take some power. And the fact that they voted the way they did on the sanctions, the most important part of those sanctions was that the president could not lift the Russian sanctions without the approval of Congress. That is the Congress taking some power back and recognizing that they have that person in the White House that is unstable, is all of those things. So there is an opportunity here for Republicans of goodwill and Democrats of goodwill to come together and start to forge a healthcare system that can be built upon what ACA was, because there are flaws, there's no question about it, but they can be fixed and it can be strengthened. But it's going to take people of goodwill on both sides. And the good thing is they don't have to worry about the president.
And in fact, just to pull from a conversation earlier today with that very energy that you're alluding to, Rob, Francis Rooney, Republican from Florida, saying today was completely against McCain's vote, but absolutely supported what he said thereafter. We must return to our normal processes, sitting across the hill saying, even though I was completely against his vote, I am absolutely for what he said. Now, I want to get some reactions from the audience really quickly, because we've got 15 minutes very quickly, and we don't have Q&A, but I just want, on this side, if you could just say one word related to the topic of Russia, and then I'm going to get their reaction about that. Okay, just go.
It's like
exaggerated, robbed. Did I get that right? Okay, corrupt.
What?
Exaggerated, corrupt, traitor. All right.
Wait, I want to know who said exaggerated? Okay, now I'm just curious, why did you say exaggerated?
I think because, if we're really sincere about worrying about our election, we would take a comprehensive approach. There are thousands of hackers all over the world that could hack the election, and to advertise the fact that Russia did this, Russia did this, Russia did this, hopefully it invites thousands of people that can plot to you. I think it's totally disingenuous. I don't think we can. I think we're doing it only because we want to spend billions of dollars to fight Russia, to build up the military, so that's the whole purpose of all political. And not, we can find anything wrong with any country in the world, any country we want, and then for some political aid, because there's always something you can want.
So politicize is what you're saying.
So you think that what happened in this particular, you're right, that people do hack. They've been hacking our elections. We've been hacking their elections. Those things have gone on, but never to the level of success that this one has had. And that's the difference. And that's why it's not exaggerated.
I think one of the things one of the things you need to pay attention to in the reporting of this story is to understand the massive industrial scale of what Russia did. This was a project that involved the labor of hundreds of people over tens of thousands of hours at expense, even in Russian pay, of tens of millions of dollars. And it wasn't just that they got lucky that John Podesta used password as his password. A lesson to all of us. Let he who has the first secure the attacks on the voting systems in South Carolina that failed, but that were attempted. With the extraordinary deployment of these ultra-targeted social media ads that either were coordinated with people in the United States, or else the Russians paid for a lot of really expert advice on local government through the industrial Midwest. This was a giant. This is not a 400-pound person on his bed. I want to say, can I pick up something? Because this is a place, we're about to have a disagreement, and we've been having so few of these.
Oh, good. So, please.
So I have been talking before about consensus, but what I mean by consensus is not coming together on agreeing on a platform. If any of you heard that United Airlines and American Airlines had set aside their differences and were coming together, or that Verizon and AT&T were setting aside their differences and coming together, you would say, that's going to be at my expense. I would like to see United and American engaging in the liveliest kind of competition and not coming together at all. What my theory of when democracy is working is you have parties, in the American system too, and other systems maybe more, that sharpen their divisions so that people have meaningful choices. That the question of more benefits at higher tax cost or fewer benefits at lower cost, that's a real decision. And you all should have a chance to make it in a clear way. The consensus that we need is not a blurry one where we govern from the center. It's a consensus in favor of rules. That when the person who wants more services and will pay higher taxes for them faces off against the person who wants lower taxes and will accept lower services, they have to, okay, we're not going to assassinate each other. We're not going to use violence. We're not going to stuff ballot boxes. We're not going to disenfranchise voters based on incidental personal characteristics. We are going to fight this one out toe to toe in a clear, clean way to make choice meaningful. So that
But are you saying that you don't believe in compromise? Is that what you're saying?
Well,
I'm trying to follow.
compromise happens in the legislative process. But,
That's what I'm talking
But what
about.
I mean about coming together, that what has gone wrong in the United States since the end of the Cold War, especially in the past 15 years, especially in the present cycle, is that that these contests are being weighed. I mean, as many people have said, when that meeting happened in Trump Tower with Don Jr., that the meeting should never have happened, and the moment like the first syllable came out, that person should have been out the door with the call to the FBI, because that's not how we compete.
The meeting shouldn't have happened to begin with.
The meeting should not have happened. But as we try to get past this, I don't think any of you should have to be any less liberal. I shouldn't have to be any less conservative.
No, nobody's saying that.
But we should be able to agree on rules of the game, rules of the road, about things we won't do in the course of democratic. And we also need to agree that when somebody wins, there are certain things that happen as a result of that. You get to govern.
You have more power. You
get to govern. It's your turn.
You have more power, but you also have to recognize, I believe, that even if you do have more power, it doesn't give you all the power. And that if you look at, because I just did a panel earlier today because I made this film about LBJ, and if you look at what he did, in order to get the civil rights legislation passed, he had to rely on a lot of Republicans. All of the Democrats in the South, they went away. He had to rely on the Republicans. He decided, this is something I want to get accomplished. He won in a landslide, one of the biggest ever in 1964. And he decided, this is what I want to do. But in order to do that, he needed to bring sides together in order to make that happen. So it's the decision of the winner to decide that, I got the agenda, this is my agenda, and if my agenda is to try to create universal health care or health care for more people, I have to understand that there are people who, like you say, want to pay less and want less services. And so how do we find a way to get more people health insurance and at the same time bring people who are on the other side along to where they'll feel at least okay, it's comfortable enough. That's governing, and that is very difficult, but that's what it involves. And I've done some of that because I have passed legislation, and I ran a thing here in California, and I did it for 7 years. And I understand how you need to listen to everybody and bring them together. It doesn't mean everybody's going to get what they want, and it means that the person in power is going to get more of what they want. But you cannot discount all the people who voted against you, because then you'll never get anything done. And I'm just saying that in the case of, whether it's going to be infrastructure, which we all agree we need to improve. Nobody on the left or right is disagreeing with the fact that we need to improve our infrastructure. Nobody on the left or right is disagreeing with that we need to reform the tax code. Nobody on the left or right is disagreeing that we need to have a better healthcare system. But the point is, we have to get a way to where we can work with each other to make it not perfect, but don't make perfect the enemy of the good, and to make it better. And that's all we can hope to do. And I think there's an opportunity. I do think there's an opportunity.
I want to move to the when. I was talking with Paul Butler, former federal prosecutor, today. And I said, how much longer will this be? And he said, 2 years before Bob Mueller comes up with a report, potentially. Talk about it in years, not months. Can this country handle this question, the Russian connection question, for 2 years?
Well, here's the thing. It may, in fact, take Bob Mueller 2 years to do. It's a very, very complicated investigation. It involves cybersecurity, involves money laundering. It involves coordination on, as David pointed out, thousands of people making this work. So that's a very, very complicated, detailed investigation. That may take 2 years. However, we do have social media. We do have news outlets that are breaking things. And there is something that happens to our psyche after a while. And we're seeing now, for the first time, people getting upset with the fact that he's gone after Jeff Sessions. So even though that investigation may take 2 years, the political dynamics of what's happening in this country could be a little quicker than that.
You brought up the idea of Sessions. What do you think here, David? If Sessions is fired, if he is let go during a recess appointment, if we have a new attorney general during the recess, is that the point where within the Republican Party they absolutely do break with this president? They've been, depending which groups you're talking about, been more favorable or agreeable with this president. But is that the moment, or has it already happened because of the health care vote?
Trump's position, President Trump's position in the Republican Party is slowly disintegrating as more and more people figure out he's actually not going to deliver anything for them. And that should have been obvious from the start. But people are hopeful. So Paul Ryan made this devil's bargain. But the key point, the fact about a devil's bargain in literature is not just that you're doing it with the devil, but also the devil always finds a way to cheat you. You never get the thing you think you're. So whatever Paul Ryan thought he was going to get, he's not going to get. So that's with the collapse of the healthcare initiative. Now the Republican tax ideas are collapsing. There's also a problem of time. That Paul Ryan and Leader McConnell have a certain bucket of minutes they started this Congress with. They're a quarter of their way through their bucket of minutes. And a lot of people have been signaling to President Trump he'd better not fire Jeff Sessions. Now, he still could, and then he could make a recess appointment, and then he could try to install somebody who would be more acquiescent.
Hard to make a recess appointment, though, when you have Senator Grassley, who's the head of the Judiciary Committee, saying he won't even take up a recess appointment until the next session. So, I mean, it's hard for him to do that.
All of that is, but those are the things. But to your question about how long does this go on, this is obviously it's a tremendous strain because there is. Donald Trump, one of the things that he and his talkers will often say is, are you questioning Donald Trump's legitimacy as president? And when they do that, they're engaging in a play on words. Because are you questioning that he was duly elected according to the forms of law? Yes. No. No, Julia, are you questioning that he is the lawful occupant of this office according to the laws as we have them? But and then they try to smuggle into that. There's this legitimacy question. Legitimacy is a moral question. And of course, if there is a smell around you that you may have been helped into power by an espionage operation by a hostile foreign power, then there's a legitimacy question, and that will eat away at this presidency. One of the things I encourage everybody in this room as they think about this question to do is to keep a mental tally, maybe even a written tally if you find that helpful, what you know, what you don't know, what you surmise, what hasn't happened yet, and what you don't know yet, and to be very clear in your mind, and to be very clear in your speech, but what you know, what you suspect, but what hasn't been shown yet. There are lots of this story that we don't know, including why did the Russians choose Trump? We don't exactly know the answer to that, and why him? We don't exactly know that. But that it happened, we know.
We do.
And we all have to act accordingly.
I've enjoyed this conversation. We only have 2 more minutes, but
Can I say one thing before we stop?
Please do.
How great is this guy without socks? He's got no socks on, and yet he was able to conduct
But that isn't the end, Rob.
He conducted a good interview without socks.
I should have worn my socks, some will say. Based on what David Frum said, what is one thing that you don't know that really worries you? And what is one thing you know that makes you feel hopeful about what the future might bring?
Well, the one thing I do know is that I'm seeing the cooler and smarter heads start to prevail. And that makes me hopeful. What I don't know is the extent of what the Russian state was able to do. I mean, I have an idea about it. I can see certain things that I do know that they've done, and I can see, but the extent of it, I don't know.
What I don't know that really worries me is the extent to which the Russian social media, the Russian state social media effort was coordinated with the Trump campaign. Because if it turns out at the end of the story that there was this one small bad family that did something really kind of scummy.
Peter Smith.
Yeah.
That guy.
Then, it's a big country. There are a lot of saints, so you have to pay for that with a certain number of sinners. If, however, it turns out that there were more than just relatives involved, that there are large numbers of people in a political operation involved in coordinating their work with Russia, then we have a real challenge to the basic framework of democracy. If that's true.
That's what we don't know.
And that's something we do not know. And I'm hoping the answer is no, that the Russians actually had the they had the expertise in-house, which you can get. I mean, it's not so hard to figure out where to place your ads in Pennsylvania, where to place them in Wisconsin. If it's in-house, then I think that's good news for American democracy. If there's cooperation, it's very worrying.
And now hopeful.
The hopeful thing is you. I mean, you're here. You care. And some of you, and the hopeful thing is some of you who have spent your lives saying, why do we need a CIA? Why do we need an NSA? Why do we need the FBI? Are suddenly realizing, you know what? These things are important. And one other thing, when you see President Trump's page, his Twitter page, you'll see he'll have a flag on the background because he's trying to rerun an old playbook where in order to wage a certain kind of culture war, he claims the symbols of the republic as his own. And I think a lot of people who would have once said that flag makes me kind of uncomfortable, not because I don't like the flag, but because it's associated with cultural positions, saying, give me back the symbols of my republic. They do not belong to you.
David Frum, Rob Reiner. Thank you. Woo!
Thank you.
We'll have more from the Politicon conference tomorrow night. Author David Horowitz and former intelligence